Today my guest is Bill Wagner. Bill, how you doing?
Pretty good, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing great. Bill is the founder of SRT Solutions, software developer, C# MVP, Microsoft Regional Director, dad. What else?
Dad, husband. That pretty much covers it.
Good guy. All right.
Good try.
Today we're talking about an author, a published author. What's your most recent book?
Okay, so depending on when this airs, it's either More Effective C#, which came out in September of 2008, or the second edition of Effective C# is going to be released in February or March of 2010. It's going through production right now.
Oh, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
So let's talk about the new book will cover the new features of C# 4.0, correct? Which will be released, I guess it just got pushed back.
Pushed
early
back a little
April,
bit.
I think, maybe?
Yeah, that is the last date I heard.
Okay. We'll ship with Visual Studio 2010, AS, or .NET 4.0, and so on. Let's talk today about the dynamic language features of C# 4.0. What is that? I'm kind of a novice as far as dynamic language.
Okay, so I'm a little bit of a novice as well. I've spent all of my career in statically typed languages that we're all familiar with. But there's a growing trend of languages such as Python or Ruby. JavaScript to some extent is a bit of a dynamic language. COM has dynamic elements to it. We always had INO and iDispatch, so we can do late binding kind of things there.
Okay.
So what C# is adding is...
Well, before you say add, just give me a definition. What does it mean to say that Iron Ruby is a dynamic language as opposed to a statically typed language?
Okay, so a statically typed language, you tell the compiler what type every variable is, and you define exactly what those are when you declare them, and those types cannot change for the life of a variable.
A type would be something like an integer,
an employee
or a
class,
customer object,
person, whatever it is, and it's all statically typed, and the compiler helps to enforce that for us.
Okay.
In a dynamically typed language, a couple different things change depending on how far it goes. You can either say that a type changes during its lifetime, so you could declare a variable and assign it to 5, then you could assign the same variable to the string ABC, or a customer object or a person or whatever, and the type changes at runtime as to what it is. The type...
Does that mean it's not strongly typed?
No, it is strongly typed. You will get runtime exceptions if you try to do the wrong thing on an object.
Okay.
But it's not statically typed, so you don't declare what the types are. So you'll new up an object, and you'll start invoking methods on that object. And the compiler doesn't know if those methods exist or not. In fact, Ruby, for instance, has a method missing member of a class.
Mm-hmm.
So you can define what happens when somebody calls a method that doesn't exist. Right? Because you can write that code.
Right.
It's dynamic. And then you can intercept that and do whatever you want. Now, that kind of programming is very powerful in certain areas, but it comes with a lot of risk, right? Code that doesn't compile now ships and blows up the runtime and things like that.
So we don't know until later that we have problems.
Right.
The compiler catches some problems for us.
That's some of it, and a lot of those is more that the compiler allows tooling that makes us more efficient in certain constructs.
Like IntelliSense.
Like IntelliSense, right? So on a dynamic object, you press dot and you get nothing, because it could be anything.
That's it.
And in fact, in Visual Studio 2010 and C#, if you have a variable declares dynamic and you go, variable dot, and IntelliSense will say type is dynamic, we'll figure out a runtime.
Okay, so
it really doesn't help you.
Yeah, so I think I've got a good handle now on what is a dynamic language. So these are languages that when variables can be typed in such a way that the compiler doesn't know at compile time what the type is going to be,
right.
But based on your actions at runtime, at that point it decides what the type is it's going to be.
Right. And what's very interesting there is now you can have types that actually change their behavior at runtime and have new methods added at runtime.
Okay.
So there are some very powerful features there.
So we're working this into C# that wasn't before. So how does that? What are those features and how do they benefit me as a developer?
So there's kind of two sides to this dynamicism in C#. Okay. One side is just a very simple keyword, dynamic. Okay. So if you have a variable and you want it to be of a dynamic type, you just say dynamic variable name equals whatever initialization thing it would be. Okay. And now that tells the C# compiler that this variable is statically typed to be dynamic.
Statically typed.
Okay, so
My
now,
head just exploded
because,
a little bit.
because C# is a statically typed language, so it
Okay.
has to have a type. The compiler has to know what it is.
All right, so C#
And it-
sees that. The compiler sees
it's
that as a
static.
type.
Yes, and its static type is dynamic.
Okay.
Okay, so what that means in the C# world is that it has the methods on object, and it has library and runtime features that enable it to find out what other methods are there at runtime on this object.
Okay.
Okay? So now I declare this dynamic variable, and I can write, var dot go do something, var dot property name equals something.
And the
var dot-
compiler will not complain when you write this.
Compiler will let it go, and it will say, at runtime, we will see if that method exists,
Mhm.
depending on what kind of thing it is. And then, when that method gets called, it will either execute correctly, or you will get some kind of exception going, no, we don't know how to do this.
Okay.
Okay? And so what you can do with that feature now is, there are a few different things that come in very handy. One is language interop, right? In .NET 4, we're going to see, somewhere in the .NET 4 timeframe, we're going to see Iron Python and Iron Ruby come out.
Okay.
So you will have ways in the DLR to create Ruby objects or Python objects and load them at runtime.
And we sort of have that now, right?
You sort of have that now. Now, right now, there's some tooling that goes on, and I admit I don't know as much about it in
Okay.
the 08 stream of Iron Ruby and Iron Python, but you can create those objects and you can do some things on it. It's all in libraries. In 4.0, the DLR actually gets added in there, the dynamic language runtime. So there's some CLR, DLR support that enables those features. So then you can load those up, and you can invoke methods, properties, or whatever on those objects created in these other languages that are dynamic. Okay, and then the library will figure out, okay, so is the method you're trying to call there? And if so, it will invoke it, and if not, it will choose not to.
So this is an advantage if I choose to use Iron Python or Iron Ruby to do part of my code.
Exactly.
Are there reasons why I'm going to split my code up and write some of it in C# or VB and some of it?
So there's a lot of interesting reasons, right? So one very nice thing is Ruby and Python are great scripting kind of languages.
Okay.
Okay, so if I have an API, I can say, so I've written this program, and if you want to load add-ins, well, why don't I just load your add-ins as Ruby, and I'll invoke methods, and you have to have those certain methods defined, and that's how I'll invoke your add-in. And you can define those however you want.
So you're saying it's easier to write add-ins in Ruby?
Sure. I think
Because
that's certainly one use case in
Okay.
this scenario. There are libraries out there, Ruby or in Python, that you might want to use in C# programs, and this is a much easier way to do it.
right. So
Um,
existing code is certainly
Right.
one way.
And another thing is the iDispatch interface in COM is a late binding interface.
Now what is that? What's the assume?
Boy, it's been a long time since I've had to do COM, but it's the late binding COM APIs
Okay.
that would be used by VBA. So now those are available from C#.
So we can call certain COM components from within .NET that we couldn't call before?
You could, but it was much more painful,
Okay.
right? You'd have to do strings, and you have to do all kinds of weird things and say,
Okay, so again, we can call them more directly.
Right.
We don't have to go through passing magic strings into these objects.
exactly.
Posting them inside of another object or
Right.
whatever.
Right. So you do the curl and co-create instance and go off and call that.
Okay.
So that's invoking dynamic objects in C#. So the other thing we can do now is now there's a base class called dynamic object that implements an interface called dynamic meta object provider. So the smart move is to derive a dynamic type from dynamic object, and now you can create a C# object that is dynamic.
Okay.
And you can have dynamic properties in this type.
Okay.
So a classic example, and there's one that's a sample on MSDN, is called an expando object.
Okay.
So an expando object, when you create it, it has nothing in it. But it's a property bank. So I can go, dynamic, my dictionary equals new expando object. I can say my dictionary dot date equals datetime.now, date string or whatever. I can say my dictionary dot city equals Ann Arbor. And those things will just compile as properties.
Okay.
And now, after having set those properties, I can retrieve those.
Right.
Right? The way that happens is by implementing overriding a couple methods in dynamic object called try get member and try set member. And they'll say, well, you're trying to set a member, I'll add a property of that type and go ahead and assign its value when you're trying to get it, and I'll see if you've ever set it. And if you have, I'll return that value. And if you try to get a property you've never created before, well, I'll say I can't do that and throw an exception.
Okay, so the try get, I get. I understand why you might fail when you try to get a property that doesn't exist. What's the purpose of the try set? Is it try set fail?
For the expander object, it couldn't.
Okay.
But there's other scenarios where you could try to set some property and whatever you're trying to build goes, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that. And there are the other overridable methods are things like try invoke member. So I'm going to try to call a function on this type, and maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't.
So you can add not only properties to it, but you can add methods to it. Is that what you're saying?
Sure.
Okay.
In fact, there's an article I have in the C# Dev Center that built a dynamic method back. Dynamic method back. So you could create this object, and you could assign, this dot some method name to some lambda, and it would execute that code when you try to call that member.
Okay. Give me the use case. When will this be helpful to me?
So the expander object is one with an obvious use case. Think of an ASP.NET MVC. You create your controller. You're going to set a whole bunch of properties and put it in some kind of a method bag and hand it off to your view to then.
Okay, so you only basically pass it one object.
So you pass it that one object. It's a dynamic method bag.
A view model or something like that. What's your question about it?
Right. So that one object is a dynamic method bag. I'll set whatever properties I want in that particular view, and then off I go.
Oh, okay. Good.
So that's pretty much the long and short of it. And that's implemented in inside the new language runtime, and the C# compiler has a lot of support to it to say if something is dynamic, then we'll try to figure out what capabilities it has at runtime. So you can think of these as things that you could do with reflection and APIs like it in the past.
Right.
But that was pages and pages of code, and now the compiler generates probably less than a page of code to rely on other library support that's already there to do the reflection. So you end up with a slightly smaller footprint, more correct, a lot easier to read.
Right.
And you can add these bits of dynamic programming inside your C# programs.
Okay, sounds pretty exciting.
It is.
So and this is available right now, and I think it's the final beta.
Beta 2 was released last October, I believe it was, October, November timeframe, last fall.
And then in April,
the
the release date for
right.
.NET 4 and
They
C#
announced
4.
that there is going to be an RC build. I don't have a date for that.
Right.
And that should be coming out, obviously, somewhere between now and April, but I don't know exactly when.
And your book will be out about the same time?
Book should be out, well, it was time for the release, and it's actually going to probably precede the release a little bit.
Okay.
One nice thing of the languages is the language stabilizes a little bit earlier than some of the library features and some of the IDE features.
Okay,
so
that makes you get that final edits in a little bit early.
So I do feel it's pretty confident that the language features that were added for aren't going to change, and it's not going to invalidate any of the guidance I put in there.
Yeah. Great. Before we go, where can people find out more about Bill Wagner?
Okay, the best place would be either follow me on Twitter, Bill Wagner, or go to my blog from srtsolutions.com/blog/Bill Wagner.
Mm-hmm.
And those are probably the two best places. And if they run Visual Studio periodically, if they've got the C# RSS feed in there, I'll show up in that feed with a column on the C# Dev Center.
Very cool. Anything else we'll say?
Well, technology and friends and code match.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you.